Hey, what's up guys? This is Anthony from Anthony's Customs, and for this review, we are looking at the DC Icons Rebirth Justice League 7-pack, which is the biggest pack I think I've ever purchased of figures. Now, this is kind of an interesting set in that, to my understanding at least, it is the only set where the figures are upscaled to this larger, not quite 1/12 scale. Most of these figures are all new designs. I guess the Flash is the same as the new 52 design, but the rest are all at least somewhat different. And so it's kind of interesting. They also don't come with any accessories, but it does come at a much lower price point than you would expect for a 7-pack of figures. So there's going to be kind of a lot to talk about, but at the same time not that much because we only have these figures to look at. No accessories, no nothing else. So that's going to do it. So let's go ahead and get them off the stand and take a closer look. Batman stands just about 16 and a half, maybe 16 and 3/4 centimeters, which makes him just over 6.5 inches. Aquaman stands just over 6 1/4 inches, which makes him just about 16 centimeters. Cyborg comes in at 15 and a half centimeters, which makes him just under 6 1/4 inches. Green Lantern stands just about 6 1/4 inches, which makes him just about 16 centimeters. Flash comes in at 16 centimeters, so that makes him just about 6 1/4 inches. They're all almost the same size, which is kind of a bummer. Wonder Woman stands in at just over 6.5 inches, which makes her just about 17 centimeters, pretty close to that. And then lastly, we have Superman coming in at just over 16 centimeters, which makes him about 6 1/4 inches, pretty close to that. So the size issue with these guys is that they're not really in scale. Some of them are a little bit taller than others, but they're almost all the same size. But there's one major issue with this set that really bothers me. And you can see, maybe you can see this right now as I'm just going to stand them up. Hopefully we'll be able to see at least most of them effectively. They are not all made by the same sculptor. They're not all designed by the same sculptor, I should say. Which means they don't all really match in terms of style. So I mentioned this during the unboxing video the other day. And you'll notice that they don't all have the same type of proportions. Like Flash and Hal Jordan are the same general size, but Hal Jordan's head is considerably small for his body. And they're only a little bit shorter than Aquaman, but Aquaman's head is much larger for his body. And then if you want to look a little bit closer, in terms of the sculpt, they don't really match. Like Aquaman's head is nowhere near the same style of sculpt as, say, Wonder Woman's head. It's a little interesting. Like, she's got a lot more of a cartoon look to her. He's got kind of a realistic look, even though the sculpting's a little bit strange. Then you have this guy who isn't really cartoonish or realistic. It's just very stylized. This one's a little bit neutral. Batman is very stylized because his nose comes all the way down to his mouth. He's got almost no upper lip area. So the styling is just very strange. Superman's got a very cartoon styling to him. And also he's got a more pronounced like shading and skin detail throughout. It's very strange the way this set was put up. It's not necessarily bad. I just don't know if they had planned originally to make this a 7-pack. I feel like the characters were all made, or the figures were all made independently, and then they decided to make it a 7-pack. So one thing I want to point out on this is that the paint job is generally really good. Let me start off by just holding up Batman so you can see this. Most of the paint is matte or flat, which makes it look really, really nice. They have a certain quality look to them, which is good. And obviously the paints are clean in general too. So most of the paint is flat, but then we do have instances like his cape, for instance, which has kind of a satin finish, which looks very nice. Or on Hal Jordan, he's probably the best example, really. He's got the flat black everywhere, but then we've got the metallic green and the gloss white. So very aesthetically pleasing figures. And if you don't look at them like right next to each other, you're probably not going to mind the style differences. It's just something we have to point out since they were sold as one single pack. I think it might have been better to have them all done by the same sculptor. Anyway, Wonder Woman's another good example. She's got the metallic gold and different finishes for the blue and the red and the silver, and obviously the skin is nice and flat. But since we're talking about paint, we have to mention she doesn't have any real shading throughout any of her flesh tones, whereas Superman, let me zoom in so you can see this a little bit better. Superman has quite a lot of shading throughout. You can see lots of little skin details, even on his hands. They put a lot of detail on this guy, whereas she has none. She has no skin detail, so it's not necessarily the best situation. Let's take a look at Aquaman. He's got a little bit of the skin detail on his neck, not too much noticeable on his face, but they did do a good job given the shading to the upper body there. No real paint anywhere else other than the belt though. As far as Hal Jordan goes, does he have any skin detail? Not really. Not so much. In his neck, you can see that it's green plastic, with skin tone on top of it. So it's not the best situation. As far as Batman goes, let's see, does he have any skin detail? Maybe a little bit. It looks like he might have some. Little bit of shading in there. How about Flash? Let's see. Yeah, I don't think so. He looks a lot more like Wonder Woman. And then Cyborg, did they do any shading? Doesn't look like it. So the paint jobs are clean, but inconsistent. He has a lot of shading throughout his armor. Throughout the silver part, there's a lot of dry brushing. Most of the other figures don't have any of that. Batman has no shading throughout any of his gray. Flash doesn't have any shading, though he does have that really nice line work, so that's cool. No shading on this guy. And no shading on this guy, like I mentioned, except for the orange. How about Superman? What do we have here? Nope, no shading anywhere except for his face and hands. So it's kind of inconsistent. She has kind of like some wash going on for the red, but nothing else anywhere. So it's very strange that they have clean paint jobs, but definitely inconsistent paint jobs. She has no paint in her hair, for instance, but the other guys have paint. He's got some paint in his hair. I'm pretty sure Superman does. Let's see. No, that's a different figure. So Superman doesn't. Hal Jordan does. Flash doesn't have hair. Cyborg, does he have any? He does not. So it's just some do, some don't type of situation, and it's kind of off-putting. I think since it is a 7-pack, you would want them all to match just a little bit more. Alright, so let's go ahead and talk about the articulation and the sculpt. I'm just going to run through each figure kind of quickly so that this doesn't become like an incredibly giant video. We have a single ball peg for the head for Batman. His head does not pop off, as was the case with the other Icons Batman. It does sit kind of high on the peg. You can see inside the head a little bit. You can even see the peg, which is flesh tone. So that's a little bit odd, but it does move pretty well. It does lean side to side, up and down, and a full rotation. The cape does go over the shoulders. You can't really do much about that, but the shoulders still work pretty well. And they have really good range. I mean, aside from the cape, you can move the arms very nicely. You have your bicep swivel, double jointed elbow, which is pretty limited, but it is there. You have a swivel and a hinge in each wrist. That's the same for every figure, in fact, so I'm not going to mention that anymore. The diaphragm joint is also the same. In fact, they all have the same articulation. I'm just going to cover range. After I get done with Batman, I'll just cover the range so you guys have an idea. So we have a ball peg for the diaphragm joint up here, but it really doesn't afford much range at all. You can just bring it forward a little bit, bring it back just a little bit. You can rotate it just a little bit, and you can move it side to side, but almost not at all, on Batman anyway, so a very limited diaphragm joint. For the ab crunch, it goes back just a tiny bit, and forward just a tiny bit. So very limited torso articulation. For the hips, we have hinged ball pegs, so you can drop them down just a tiny bit. They look really nice when they're up. When you bring them down, they're supposed to afford more range, and they do technically, but due to the sculpt, it's not very good range. You get to do splits very nicely, but you can't really bring the legs forward effectively. It always turns them. You do have a ball peg in there though, and a socket, so you can rotate the thigh around that technically, but once it's posed, like once it's out, you can't really do it due to the sculpt. So it is very limiting. We do have double jointed knees, which work very nicely, so that's pretty good. We do have double jointed knees, which work very nicely, so that's good. And then for Batman, we have a hinge in the ankle, which works very nicely, and we have an ankle rocker. No shin swivel on Batman. Some of them do, some of them don't. I'll mention that as we go. So his articulation is pretty limited. It's not great. It's probably good enough, but it's not going to really satisfy people that want to put him in dynamic poses. Sculpt is pretty good. They all have that kind of larger lower body than the upper body thing going on, which is just the style of these figures. So I think that's okay. And the rest of the sculpt does look pretty nice. I like the cape. It's purple on the inside, black on the outside, so that looks good. I don't know, it's a pretty nice looking figure. So let's move on to Aquaman. Aquaman is particularly bulky in the chest region. His head does have kind of a weird sculpt to it. It's kind of odd looking in both the sculpt and size just compared to the other figures, but it's not terrible. And then they did a really nice job sculpting his upper body. I like the scale mill on there. The lower body looks like all the other figures pretty much, so that's good. They did put the little fins on here, on the calves and on the forearms, so that's nice. As far as articulation goes, the head is on the same kind of ball peg. Doesn't lean too much side to side, but probably enough. Up and down works. Full rotation, that's fine. Shoulder joint goes all the way horizontal. Full rotation, no problems there. Bicep swivel works no problem. His arms are on the wrong sides, by the way. Biceps are on the wrong side, so that is something hopefully is not uniform across the entire batch of figures. You may have to pop yours apart though. If you have to do that, get out a hairdryer, warm them up very, very, very much. You don't want to have them cool, you might break them. They still might break, to be completely honest, so be extra careful. You have to pop the bicep off of the shoulder on both sides. You'll have to unpeg the elbow, which is very problematic on some figures. So be careful with that. Then you'll have to swap the biceps. Just pop them back on and then repeg them and you should be okay, but be very careful. We do have a double jointed elbow there, wrist swivel and hinge still there. Range on this guy, I can't get his torso to move forward and back at all. Side to side, it does work a tiny bit. And then rotation, a tiny bit. Ab crunch, same as Batman, not much range. Paint job could definitely be better right here, but it does look good everywhere else. For the hips, he's got basically the same range as Batman. They don't come down very far, so you can do the splits, but you can bring the legs forward only if you bring them up at an angle. Double jointed knee works just fine. Ankle hinge, basically the same as Batman because we have no shin swivel. Everything else works the same. Moving on, let's go ahead and look at Hal Jordan. So Hal Jordan definitely has a much slimmer build, much thinner. Very, very stylized looking, I think, compared to the other guys. So I don't know if that's a great thing or not. The sculpt is okay, though. We do have some line work going on in the sculpt and in the paint, obviously, so that's very nice. He's got the armored up shoulders. The chest logo sculpted and painted nicely, so overall the sculpt's okay. It's just he's got a very narrow torso compared to some of the other figures. As far as articulation goes, the head can move a little bit side to side. Rotation is very stiff because the chin or the jawbone hits into the Adam's apple area, but it does work. Looking up and down is pretty limited, so flight poses may be a problem. For the shoulders, pretty good range all the way around. Bicep swivel, double jointed elbow, everything there works. Wrists, no problem at all. Torso joint or diaphragm joint doesn't lean forward and back at all. Doesn't really want to lean side to side at all, and it just rotates a little bit. Not too much. The ab crunch leans back a little bit and forward a little bit. The hips, a little bit extra play in that hinge there, so you can definitely do the splits, and you can bring the legs pretty far forward without throwing them in too crazy of an angle, but it's still pretty angled. Thigh swivel doesn't help that much. I did have this leg pop off a lot, but now it seems to stay on okay, so that's all right. Double jointed knees work pretty well. He does actually have a boot swivel, which is pretty nice if you like those. It's on there. Ankle hinge works nicely going forward and back, and then of course you have your ankle rocker, but it's a very steep angle for the ankle rocker. Because of how they sculpted the feet very narrowly and with fat ankles, he has a very, very weird ankle rocker. It throws the foot off at a crazy angle. So even with that boot swivel, you're going to have trouble posing this guy unless you really, really crank on that shin swivel. So good luck with that. He does have the sculpted sculpted ring on his finger. I don't know how I got wrist out of that. Let's look at Flash. Flash is probably one of the better proportioned figures, I think, out of the bunch, so I like that a whole lot. He's got a very nice sculpt to him, and the chest emblem is sculpted nicely. The ear things are sculpted nicely. I like the head. All of it looks pretty good. They did a good job sculpting the boots. Again, it's just weird that some of these guys are from the same sculpture and some of them are not. And even some of the ones that are have fairly different styles, so it's kind of interesting. As far as the head goes, it looks up and down a little bit. Side to side, no problem. Will it lean? Yeah, just a little bit. Shoulders work, no problem, so that's pretty good. Bicep swivel, double jointed elbows, wrist swivel and hinge, no problem. Diaphragm joint, his is pretty good at leaning back. You can lean it back a little bit more than the other ones. Not so far forward. side to side just a little bit. And then of course you just have a tiny bit of rotation, maybe less than the other ones even. Ab crunch works just about the same, and his is even a little bit floppy. For the hips, the hinge works probably about the same as Hal Jordan's. In fact, the thighs might even be the same sculpt. Let's see. Nope, different sculpt. But it works just about the same. You can get the legs all the way out to the side. Can you bring them forward? Yes, but they are definitely going to be fairly well angled. You can kind of rotate them around, but when you try to, they pop off. So not going to get the best range out of those hips. As for the knees, double jointed knees work no problem. Shin swivel, yes, we have one, so that's good. Ankle hinge goes really far back, far enough forward, and then you do get a really nice ankle rocker, so you can use that very effectively. So that's pretty good. Flash is probably one of the better ones, not counting the torso. I like that. I don't know I don't know if we're doing the same order as they were on the display stand anymore, but who cares? For Cyborg, he's definitely really nice looking in terms of the sculpt, so I like that a whole bunch. He seems to have really good proportions like Flash, so that's nice. As far as the articulation goes, the head, it can look up and down a little bit. Obviously it can rotate, but it's very, very stiff. I don't know why it's so stiff. It doesn't look like it's hitting up against anything, but it can do it. And leaning side to side, yes, just a little bit. For the shoulders, pretty much full range, no issues there. Bicep swivel is fine. Double jointed elbow, very limited on this guy because he's a little bit extra bulky. His forearms come off. I'm not sure if that has something to do with the fact that the other Cyborg figure has interchangeable parts, but this guy is upscaled, so I don't know. That's the other thing. I'm not sure if the standard releases are going to be upscaled. I don't think they are. I think it's only the 7-pack, so I'm not sure why that is carried over on this guy. I'm not sure. Maybe if you guys have any other figures, you can let me know. I don't have any of the ones that I haven't reviewed, so I can't speak to that. But he does have a swivel at the forearm because of that peg, and then of course the wrist has the swivel and the hinge. Diaphragm joint works particularly well on this guy. You can move it around very nicely. Not so far forward and back, but a little bit, and then you can rotate it. Takes a little bit of force, but it works, and then it leans very nicely. The ab crunch, very limited. Not much range in that ab crunch. For the hips, they don't drop down very far, and they do throw the leg off at an angle, but you can do the splits. Hopefully they tweak that as they go forward, because the splits aren't as useful as bringing the leg forward in a natural way. Double jointed knee works very nicely, so that's good. For the ankle, no problem at all there. It works nicely. Full rotation, or full hinge and ankle rocker, so that's pretty good. Let's do Wonder Woman. For Wonder Woman, the hair is a soft plastic, though the sculpt, it has these weird little peg holes, like opening area underneath, which you can still see through from the front, so that's not ideal. The neck movement is fairly limited despite the hair being soft, and the head sculpt is a little bit weird. It looks kind of flat, like it's been kind of mushed. Not the best head sculpt. I don't know what happened there. For the shoulders, we have a little bit more limited range going out to the side. Full rotation though, so that's okay. Bicep swivel is fine. Double jointed elbow works very nicely. Wrist swivel and hinge, no problem. Diaphragm joint, hers is okay. It leans back and side to side a little bit, but not very far forward. Her ab crunch works probably better than the rest of them, so that's pretty nice. Her skirt is very soft, though mine came unglued, so you're going to have to be careful with that. And the hips have the same range, or same articulation as the other ones, but because of the skirt, they have a little bit better range going forward and back, but they're very limited side to side. I'm not sure what happened there. Going this way, they're pretty nice, and you can even rotate them a little bit forward, so they're not at that much of an angle. But it is still an angle, so it's not a great situation. We have a double jointed knee still underneath that armor, which works very nicely. The ankle range is very good going forward and back, but due to the style of the foot, the ankle rocker is basically just a swivel, which is not good. You can't really use that ankle rocker at all. So she does look pretty good, except for her face. It's still a little bit weird. And some of her articulation's a little bit better, and some of it's a little bit worse. I don't know. She's okay. And then lastly, for Superman, we have a ball peg again for the head, which is very limited forward and back, or up and down. Rotation works okay. Leaning it from side to side works just a little bit. I do like the fact that the hair is a separate sculpt, so that it hangs over the face. So that's pretty cool. Cape is a nice sculpt too, by the way. I don't know how I feel about it wrapping around quite so much, but otherwise it's really good, and the way it inserts into the chest is very nice. For the shoulders, pretty much all the way out to the side, full rotation. It's a little stiff, but it works. So just be careful with that. You have your bicep swivel, double jointed elbow, very limited on the elbow joint, so be aware of that. Wrists are fine, of course. We have a very limited diaphragm joint. It just leans back pretty much. Not so far forward. Side to side is actually pretty good. And then rotation is pretty limited. They did sculpt the overall shape of the S logo, not the S itself, but the outside perimeter, so that's pretty good. And then we have the diaphragm, or the ab crunch, which just isn't that great. None of them seem to be that great, and his is pretty limited as well. For the hips, he's probably got the worst range in the pull down. It has almost none. So you're just going to be able to do the splits and bring the leg out to the front. Really just brings it out to the side at an angle. So it's very limited. Double jointed knees work just fine. And then we have our ankle hinge, which works nicely, so that's good. And then our ankle rocker. One thing I absolutely love about these guys is they're still doing the knees the way I like them, where the calves, or the thighs and the calves, are both rounded at the hinge, so that when you bend them, you don't have these big flat chunks of plastic like we have on our Marvel Legends. So it looks very good when it's not bent, and it also looks very good when it is bent. So these guys definitely do have a lot of nice attributes, but they do lack a lot in the articulation department. So be aware of that if you're going to be getting these guys to pose them. They do not have the best range in all of the poses you want to do. It's going to be pretty limited. So be aware of that, but they do have generally very nice paint jobs, though maybe not as uniform as we would like. And same thing for the sculpts. Overall, very nice sculpts, but maybe not as uniform as we would like. So I do recommend the set, given that it's a very nice price point for what you're getting. But you have to be aware of those issues before you buy it so that you're not disappointed when you get it home. So there it is, guys. Thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. I have new videos up every single day. We talk about action figures, movies, TV shows, video games, all kinds of fun stuff. So make sure you come back for that. Give the video a thumbs up if you liked it. And in the meantime, keep collecting.